Welcome to this spring webinar session, Talking Turkey with Lou Gambale. My name is Ryan Risher. I'm a biologist with New Jersey Fish and Wildlife. As we go through this seminar, there's also going to be plenty of information that's going to be supplemented by Joe Wesky, another biologist who oversees our hunter education program as well as our R3 program. And finally, we're going to be putting on this webinar tonight with Lou Gambale, who's part of the New Jersey State Chapter of the National Wild Turkey Federation. What we're going to be doing tonight is, quite frankly, just talking turkey. Calling is a really important part of turkey hunting. Aside from scouting, it's probably going to be one of the most important tools that you'll be able to utilize in the field. It's something that does require a lot of time and patience, and over time with experience, it's going to be something that's going to pay dividends for you to know how to call, when to call, what types of calls in all different scenarios. And with that being said, it can be a very rewarding and fun thing to experience. It's very reinforcing, when you are out in the field in the spring and you hear a gobbler far off in the distance gobble back to you. He may sound like he's 200 yards away. Then you hear him again, he's 100, and he's 50, and you just know he's getting closer and closer, and it just builds up that anticipation and excitement. It's bar none probably one of the neatest things that you'll experience out in the woods. So what we're going to do tonight is we're going to go through some of the most common calls that are available, especially for beginner hunters. There may be stuff here that you'll learn that will apply if you are even an intermediate or experienced hunter. We're hoping that this webinar touches all different types of hunters' levels of experience, and that way they're going to hopefully take something away from this. So one other thing I do want to mention is that we're also going to be going through different vocalizations that turkeys make. Turkeys make a suite of vocalizations that are always in contact with one another, and those vocalizations that they make mean different things. So it's important to be thinking about that and mindful of that when you're out in the turkey woods. You want to be able to use certain mimicry based on the sounds that other turkeys are making, but you also want to use that to your advantage, thinking about how you can solicit a gobbler to come within range of your gun or bow. Now, one final thing I want to mention before we get into the seminar is, as a turkey hunter, you need to be mindful, whether it's the spring or fall, you are required to have some form of a calling device in your possession, whether it's a diaphragm call, a box call, a slate call, anything to that effect you are required to have on your possession. So please do keep that in mind. With that being said, I'm going to kick this over to Lou, and we're going to get right down into how he exactly gets started for his season when he gets right to it and gets out of bed in the morning. Take it away, Lou.
Magical time of the year, right? We're heading into preseason and what I call preseason scouting. And what I like to do is typically this is the time of the year I get out. The birds are already being pretty active, and great opportunity in the morning, even if it's before work or if you have the pleasure of being off, is to get out and go strategically park yourself someplace in the areas you plan on hunting, whether it's on a wildlife management area or even private land. Take a walk, grab a cup of coffee, position yourself somewhere up against a tree, and just let the woods wake up. And that's what I do. And I listen for gobbling, and then I make simple notes of where that gobbler is. So as we're now getting ready to head in to season, typically those gobblers are going to remain in those areas, at least for the beginning of the season. So I make a note of where they are. I always edge on the side of not disturbing the birds. So I'm cautious about the way I go about the business of it. I get earshot of a bird, and that satisfies me. You could, in some cases, and I've done this, if I can go to an area and, sit at a strategic place where I know I'm not going to disturb the birds going about their afternoon business, but just at dusk when they begin to think about their parade to the roost, if I can, fetch up a pair of binoculars and get eyes on them and watch them head into a certain place. Again, I've got an idea where those birds are. That's going to help you. It helps me, I know, when I go into the woods in the dark of the morning, that I don't just go in, without any knowledge of where I might be treading. So I don't disturb the birds and potentially just wreck a hunt. So that's kind of the way I go about it. Um, you can look for sign. Obviously, tracks or priceless droppings. The U shape of a or the L shape, if you will, or of a gobbler dropping. You can look for gobblers strut areas where they drop their wings down and they make those noticeable drag marks in the sand or in the dirt. And you look for those things, and there are areas where during the mid morning or early morning, a gobbler or even an afternoon is strutting. You don't have to see the bird to get a sense of where that bird is. So I enjoy scouting because to me it just it extends the season for me, and I would recommend that for folks to do that. It's to me it's as equally important to do that as it is to get out and enjoy the hunt. Um, from there, once I have that all intact, of course, I go through the regimen of checking all my calls and conditioning them up and getting them ready. I always check all my equipment. I carry a light chair with me. I carry a satchel bag. You can see this bag. I don't wear a vest anymore. I've gotten away from that. I'm a pack light, pack right kind of turkey hunter, and I like to have everything I need, just enough. Um, you know, Patterning in your gun, again, I think is very important. To me, it doesn't matter how I finished up the prior season. I still need to go out and take a couple shots just to make sure that, my pattern is still where it is. If you opt in the off season, obviously to change guns or change a sight, and or change your shot shell size or a different brand, again, I would encourage you to take the time to go out and shoot your gun and make sure you're very comfortable, because you really only get one chance at this gobbler, one good chance, and you want to make sure you make a great, clean, ethical kill when you do shoot at them. So all those things are important, and I could go into great detail, but I think you all get it. And it's a little bit of diligence before you begin to hunt is going to go a long way to ensure that you've got everything with you when you go out to hunt that morning. Because when you get out of bed at 3:30, 4:30 in the morning to go turkey hunting, that's not the time you want to be fumbling around in the garage or the shed or wherever it is you keep your gear and trying to remember where you had something or didn't. Slip your boots on, do all the necessary stuff. What's it going to do for you? It's going to make you prepared, and it's going to pump you up, right? It's all part of the prelude to enjoying a great, safe season. And I always put that word safe in there because right before you get involved in any of these things, safety is, top of mind all the time, not only for yourself, but thinking about others in the woods. And we'll talk a little bit more about that later. So the before the season is important. And I'd also add with that is organize your tags. A lot of folks in New Jersey, you buy a multitude of tags and, put your tag with your actual permit. Make sure you've got them lined up appropriately. You might not need to carry C and D week around or B week with you when you're hunting A week. Why complicate the situation? And then get in the habit when each week expires to take out the old permit. Hopefully you're only taking out the permit because you were able to use the tag, and then put in your next tag. And that, again, gets you prepared for the next week. So preparation, I believe, is very important. Not a lot of folks, I mean, I've seen so many folks over the years that didn't put that time into that, and I think they pay for that later. So for me, I'm going through those motions now because my season starts a little bit before New Jersey. So it's a necessity for me to do that. Now, as I get into the season, I'm very comfortable that on Monday morning, I believe the 25th of April, I'm going to be up out of bed and I'm going to be on my way with pretty much all my tools of the trade ready to go. I'm packed and I'm on my way. So from there, I'll segue into go about the hunt. Again, a little bit of preseason scouting, if you're able to do it, is going to put you in a position that you make a direct drive or walk or however you get to your first hunt that first morning without too much interference. Now, with that said, how I go about business with that is that I want to put as minimal disturbance in the woods as I can early in the morning. I think one of the greatest gifts of turkey hunting is being out there in the dark and being able to be one with nature, letting the woods wake up. As far as I'm concerned, it's priceless. And what I generally do is I get myself settled, I get everything together, and then I just take my time and I mosey down to, if I know exactly where I want to get to, that's fine. If I don't, I kind of meander to a point maybe where I don't think I've made much interference. I get up against a tree and I let the woods begin to wake up. I'm obviously hoping that I'm going to get some kind of communication early in the morning, be it a gobble. Now, what I would tell you is this is a point where this is where you got to begin to exhibit some caution. When you think about going down into the woods, many times you're walking down through fields or open areas and you've got woods lines. I would tell you, put yourself up against your woods line and move slowly down let the woods be your breakup. Don't walk down through the middle of a field. So many people make that mistake. I've seen them do it over the years because birds that are roosted, they don't have to be roosted right on the edge of the woods line to pick you off. Remember, turkeys are used to hearing and seeing movement throughout the night. It just comes with the landscape. You've got all kinds of critters moving around throughout the night making noise. So while they're, tucked away on a branch somewhere, they're used to hearing that. You've got deer moving around, you've got coyotes moving around, you got fox, raccoons, and every other thing moving around. So early in the morning, if you cautiously make your moves through the woods, you can get away with a lot. And you get down to an area, and then you can, if you get the luxury of hearing a gobble, then you can make a move on a bird based on the proximity you hear. But I would tell you, keep in mind, as you're making that move, again, be particularly cautious because there usually will be hens somewhere between where you're at and where that gobbler is. And when a hen picks you off, that's probably worse than having a gobbler pick you off because she's going to make sure she either flies away in such a way that she's going to alert that gobbler that he doesn't want to come that way, or she's going to make a point to quickly get to that gobbler that much quicker because you began to call after you got settled and she puts two and two together. Don't underestimate turkeys' brain sense. They've got a little bit more of it than we give them credit for. Instinctively, they do things triggered by things we do. So as I go about my business, that's how I kind of get myself set. Now, sometimes because I think I know because of scouting, I got a good idea where that gobbler's roosted up. I may just go ahead and get myself down to a particular area, get myself settled. When I'm moving through the woods, and I would tell you to do this, especially after a day breaks, I'm always looking a bit ahead of myself to think about where will I drop myself in the event that I have to drop and set up quick. I think it's very important. When you think about hunting turkeys, your setup is going to mean as much as anything you do during a turkey hunt. There's so many things to think about. If you're moving through an open area and there's a little island of woods in the open area, and then you've got, say, a 50, 75-yard break to the woods line, what I would tell you is don't set up on that island, okay? Because even though it looks inviting and it looks like a place where you've got this great visual vantage point, when that gobbler comes almost to that woods line, he's going to be looking for that hen. Now, if he can look at that island, he can see everything around that island. He can see the island. And all he's thinking is, I don't see the hen. That's a license to hang up. So many turkeys are lost because you picked the wrong setup. And once you pick the setup, when it's game on, you got to live with it. So I always tell folks, again, thinking ahead before the actual moments of truth, if they happen, are going to go a long way to the success or failure or the finish of a turkey hunt. Even when you do all those things, many times these hunts don't end up the way we hope they would. And that's part of, again, in my mind, part of the beauty of a turkey hunt, which is, great turkey hunters typically, even when they have what's deemed a successful season, when you roll up the amount of days they hunt, they have a very low batting average if you equate it to baseball. and that's okay, because that's the way that's the way it was made to be set up. So again, there's a whole lot of things to think about in the morning. As the sun breaks, you know, I tell folks all the time, especially early in the season when the gobblers might tend to be henned up. And when I say henned up, that means that gobbler's still in full breeding mode. Those birds are still involved in their laying an egg daily. And if he's got a harem of 6, 8 birds, he's going to try to breed all those birds, okay, before they take off to go lay an egg in the nest. So as those hens try to get to that gobbler in the morning, you're really in a fight. And I will tell you, most turkey hunters, when they get in a battle with a vocal hen, they come out on the short end of the stick. There's a lot of articles, and every once in a while you beat one, but don't be misled. There's no substitute for the real thing. So what I try to do when I know that there's a gobbler in proximity to me, but there's also hens, I will try to get up as tight on that gobbler as I can, because that's going to be my best chance when he pitches down off the roost to maybe coax him to get to me, or cut those hens off before they get a chance to get to him. Now that can be risky business, especially for a new turkey hunter, because I would tell you, probably err on the side of caution in your beginning years of turkey hunting before you just take that great step for man or womankind and go charging into the roost site. I've been messing with turkeys a long time, so it's not a problem for me to do what I do, and I get a sense about what I think I can get away with and what I don't. But I'm more astute about that here today than I was, call it 25 years ago. 25 years ago, I absolutely made more mistakes, but you learn from your mistakes. So another thing I tell a new turkey hunter is, don't be afraid to try things. One of the greatest ways to be a better turkey hunter is through your error, because you really do need that. You need to get beat to really put yourself in a better position the next time. And I tell folks, it's okay. It's okay to maybe call too much. It's okay not to call enough. It's okay to move. Sometimes you move too soon. Nobody's going to give you the manual or the book, because every gobbler for every hunter is going to be a different situation. And that's part of the greatness of turkey hunting. Now, I say all this to say to you that I encourage turkey hunters, new ones, to do everything you can to hunt them kind of what I call a traditional way, pitting yourself on the ground against a bird. Now, for some folks, that's not an option. Some folks have limited walking abilities or handicaps and things that will keep you from being able to move around as much as you'd like to. Lord knows I'm getting a lot older than I ever was, so I'm cognizant of that. If you choose to hunt from a blind, and I always bring this up because there's a lot of people that hunt from blinds today, I will tell you though, again, when you think about that preseason hunting, the positioning of the blind will have a lot to do with your success or failure of a turkey hunt. A lot of folks get visual of turkeys while they're still flocked up during the back end of the winter season. And they say, well, I put my blind here because when I was deer hunting, there were 35 birds there. That's great. But just keep in mind, during the season, your gobblers are together, your hens are together. Really has no bearing on where those birds are going to be when the pecking order is established and they break up for breeding. You should be more tuned into doing some scouting in proximity to the beginning of your season, so that you've got better line of where those birds actually are at that time. Then pitch your blind. There were times in years past, I did a little guiding for some folks out of state, and people, when I had hunters that wanted to hunt out of blinds, a lot of them would bring their blinds with them. They said, well, I only hunt out of a blind, so that's fine. And I scouted the area, and I'd carry them out the night before, and I'd say, we're going to get eyes on these turkeys. When it gets dark, we're going to put your blind up. And these, hunters would be like, what, are you kidding me? I said, no, let them go in. They're going to roost. And then here we are at 9 o'clock at night. I'm, working my way down the edge of the field line, setting a blind just inside the woods line in a twitch road or right on the edge. I'll even go as far to put my decoy set up. because they want to hunt over decoys. That's fine. Put the decoy set up, shoop, out of there I go. So when I carry that hunter in there the next morning, we're going in there, no muss, no fuss, sneaking in the blind, getting the hunter settled. And now you can sit there and let the woods wake up instead of going in there with your blind and your chairs and all your stuff and rattling and banging and popping open the blinds and dragging them around. And, you know, even if you have a good area to set up in, you might risk busting the bird off. Remember, if you spook a bird on the roost, just because he's wary of you doesn't mean he won't gobble during the early morning before he pitches down. But if you make too much noise and too much disturbance, too close to when the sun breaks, I promise you, when that gobbler pitches down, he's not coming your way. And so many times hunters say, oh, you know, he always came my way, but, you know, this morning he went the opposite way. Well, that's because you put something in his mind before he came down. And even though he was talking to his hens, he's heading the other way. So again, I know it's a lot to feed you, but these things are important to help you with the success of your turkey hunt before you even whip a call out and start to try the call. So again, as the sun breaks, the only thing you got to be mindful of is when a gobbler gets with his hens, there really is, it is particularly difficult to call a gobbler off the hens. Now, there are times, and it'll happen to me, you know, I'm not going to say frequently because that's not fair, where I can have her break and come to me and drag the whole harem with her. In the case of that gobbler falls prey because of the arrogance of the hen. But more times than not, you're going to waste a lot of time ripping away, listening to a gobbler. He'll answer you. He'll get in a shouting match with you, and you'll think, "Oh my God, I'm a great caller. Listen to this gobbler. He's just every time I hit my call, he gobbles back." But guess what? He's not coming because he's tied up with those hens. One of the biggest mistakes hunters make, twofold: moving around too much after the birds get hooked up with the hens and they go trotting right into the action zone and bust them all loose and cause a whole lot of disturbance that they didn't need to do. And the second thing they do is just about the time when they really ought to retool and refocus, they leave the woods and go have breakfast or coffee. And oh my goodness, I've seen so much of it. Personally, for me, I hunt early in the morning. I love the woods waking up. I love an opportunity to gobble off the roost. And many times, if I can't get that bird then, if I'm going to go get a cup of coffee, it's going to be between 7:30 and 9:30 in the morning. Because at the end of the day, I'm like, you know what, pal, you earned your time. Take care of your hens, and I'll be back to see you at 10 o'clock. Once that gobbler is done breeding those hens and they start peeling off one by one to go to their nest to lay their eggs, eventually he's going to be a lonely soul. And I will tell you, from that mid-morning time, almost up till, you know, of course, if you think about our season in New Jersey, ABC week, ending at noon, if you hear a gobble, you better get yourself set and you better get ready. And that'll segue me to this. So many turkey hunts are lost at the last couple minutes of the moment of truth because a hunter cannot sit still, reaches for a call when they shouldn't, or does something to alert that gobbler or let him see you. The epitome of a turkey hunt is when you are set, stealthy, and ready, and you see a head pop up looking for you, and he doesn't see you. Advantage, hunter. Okay? What might happen if you don't practice all that cautiousness is you get a bird that gobbles, you think he's on his way, there's a couple moments of silence, you make an errant move, grab for a call because you think you need to hit him one more time, and you never hear your turkey again. And you say, oh, geez, he just stopped gobbling and I don't know what happened to him. I guarantee you more times than not what happened was he saw you. and he just turned around and got out of the area. They don't say anything to you usually when they're leaving. So, and when a turkey doesn't like, unlike a deer, when you deer hunt, a deer gets you bust a deer starts hopping away, incessantly stops, turns around and looks at you. That's why they get themselves in trouble. When a turkey doesn't like something, he's heading for the next county line. Doesn't know what it is that spooked him, but what he does know is I'm getting far enough away that I don't have to worry about it. So again, I'd ask you to keep all those things in your foremost of your mind. So it's a lot to process, but when you really go out and you put all this time in, preseason scouting, preparation of gear, honing up your calling skills, all these things to prepare for the hunt, just keep all those little things in mind because you don't have a lot of time. When a turkey gobbles, you sit down, he gobbles again, and you already know he's closer to you. You need to get yourself ready and set right there. Now, this is where, when I talk about calling, you have to be very careful. Now, if you're in a blind, yes, it's different. You're hidden. You can get away with a lot, and that's good. Me personally, I love the challenge of having to be particularly careful about what I'm doing because I feel like I owe that to the bird. That's just me. I get spiritual about turkey hunting, but to me, it's when I go through all this and this bird wants to do what he does, I put myself in a situation where I risk failure. And if I mess it up, then guess what? He wins the chess game that day. And good on him and bad on me, and we'll go do it again another day. That's just what I like to do, and I get a kick out of that. I would tell you that when you think about calling, you want to call just enough to get the bird to come to you, but in your mind, and I tell people this, and I used to say this in the live seminars, is I try to read the bird. I'm always telling the hunters, try to read the bird. People say, what do you mean read the bird? So here's what I say. When you wake up in the morning, especially if you got a few days invested in either a bird or turkey hunting, that bird's already in your head. I don't know. I'm sure somebody's going to agree with me on this one that, I've tossed and turned from whatever time I went to bed until I finally caved in and surrendered and got up out of bed and said, I can't take it anymore. I got to get out to the woods. Because in my mind, this bird's in my head and what I'm going to do and why I'm going to do it, what didn't work yesterday, what didn't work the day before, and how I'm going to change that and how I'm going to go about it. So what I tell hunters is the sooner you can get in that turkey's head, the better. Because now you get in his head. Now he's the one that's trying to think about, well, the hen should be coming to me, but she did a little bit, but not enough, but I'm going to go this far. And now you've got him thinking. When you've got him thinking, you got a much better chance to take that bird. So calling becomes a very important part. Your setup and your calling become paramount at that point, because then that's when once you make the setup, now the selection of calls and how you go about those calls are very important. Let me take you through a couple calls. And to keep this simple, I'll show you some calls and some simple calls that you can think of about using. Here's one that it's amazing. I've seen an amazing amount of popularity pop up with these calls. This is a simple push pin made by Mike Lapp. He's one of probably the most successful call makers in America. And this little call, while there's not much to it, is a perfect call for a new hunter. Little push button post here, and you just you can make all the simple sounds. A little purr, buck, cut. Now, I wouldn't use that call first thing in the morning. First thing in the morning, when I want to get a bird's attention, he's on the roost, I got a feeling I know where he is or I've heard him gobble, I generally start my day with a pot call. Here's a simple slate call. You got your striker holding my hand here, and all I do is just that's a very subtle call, almost to the point where you're sitting at the base of a tree and you can barely hear it yourself. And a lot of folks say, why don't you call louder? You don't need to do that. You don't need to be the dominant player in the woods at 6 o'clock in the morning or 6:30 in the morning. All you want to do is let that bird know you're there. When I'm doing that and that gobbler answers me, and you'll know when he answers you, generally he'll cut you off or they'll cut you off. Maybe give him one more round of cadence, put the call down. Let things unfold from there. Because from that point, going forward to when he decides to pitch down, if you begin to pick up your volume, you start getting, engulfed in his gobbles. Now, don't be surprised if you hear a hen start chirping, or 2 hens, or 3 hens. Once you've done that, you put yourself in purgatory, because what you've done is you woke up the sleeping giants. And what they're going to do to you is they're going to derail your hunt quick, because they're thinking to themselves, I don't know who you are, honey, but you're not getting to him before we do. And you'll put them in hyper gear, and when they come down, they'll pitch towards him, he'll pitch towards them, and they'll get off and head away from you. Hens will take gobblers away from foreign hens sounds as quick as they possibly can. And so your morning hunt will end real quick. You'll go from a gobbler you may be 100 yards away from, and maybe have an opportunity to have him pitch down and be only 50 yards away from you when he hits the ground, to hens that get to him, and literally within minutes, he'll sound like he's 300 yards away. And you only have one person to thank for that, yourself. We all have done it, and we all will continue to do it. It's just a matter of that balance of how much is too much.
So Lou, real quick, not to cut you off here.
I'm glad you interjected.
Yeah, I'm glad. I think this is a question that's going to come up at some point. So, firstly, you're mentioning getting on that slate call, that pot call really softly. What exactly in that situation are you trying to mimic? What type of turkey sound, or, if you were to translate it to us having a conversation, are you trying to mimic at that point?
A tree yelp. Thank you, Ryan. Great question. It's basically a tree yelp. And I'm glad you brought this up. When you sit in the woods and you listen to these birds, they're always communicating. It's interesting when you first start turkey hunting. A lot of turkey hunters don't hear a lot of the simple communication that's going on. But when the woods are beginning to wake up, hens just very subtly, if your ears aren't tuned to that, you may not hear it. But trust me, the gobbler does. That's just what we call a tree yelp. And that's just her letting him know that, hey, I'm in proximity to you. I hear you gobbling, and I'll get there as soon as it's time for us to get down on the ground. And that's how they start their day. There's a lot of talk out there about why these birds go about this. And, you can get involved in this thought process, but some hens do it because maybe they don't want to wake up the rest of the hens, and they want to be the first one to get to the gobbler because they want to be the first one to go lay an egg. I mean, you could write anything you want into that. There's also some truth, I think, though, to the fact that gobblers, after they hit the ground now, generation over generation, have become much quieter due to pressures from hunters, pressures from predators. Gobblers gobble a lot less on the ground because they can get to a hen without blasting their location. So hopefully that answered your question, Ryan.
Yeah, and I think going back to that slate pot style call. So I guess in your recommendation, that's a really good maybe starter call for somebody to start out with, where it's very
I think it is,
simplistic
or
to use. And
the box call. The box call again is I like the slate call because I can make that tree yelp break at a very soft, subtle note, where your box call is a little tougher. It's a little bit higher pitch. You get away with it though. I mean, box calls are I think every hunter should carry a box call. They're a call that you've got your yelps. You do a lot with a box call. And I tell folks, carry a box call with you, carry that slate or glass call. Important thing is make sure you're comfortable with the striker and the striker's working for you with your surface. On these pot calls, you got a simple scratch pad. It's very easy to fix them up. You just give them a little rub, nothing fancy. Do the same thing on the end of your striker, and you're ready to go. You keep them up to speed. Don't let them get wet. It's always the deal. I keep mine in a little case like this. I put them in the case, then they go inside my satchel. I'm always very cautious and protective of the calls. This little push button call, this little push pin, it's a great little call to carry with you. It's simple to use. A lot of new hunters are very hesitant to call. They're afraid. I hear it so many times. I'm afraid I'll mess up my hunt. And then I go back to what I said to y'all earlier, which is part of becoming a better turkey hunter is messing up some hunts. I wholeheartedly believe that, and nothing's ever going to change my mind about that. It's okay to mess up. So again, your selection of calls. Here's the other thing. People will say, I don't think I called enough, or I think I called too much. Again, back to reading that bird. Is you want to be able to try to get a sense of what is that bird thinking? Is he moving as I'm calling? Is he stuck in one place? There's a whole lot of things that begin to happen. If you're fortunate enough that when you hit a bird with a call, you hit him. Here's what I tell you. If I'm sitting there with my call, it doesn't matter what call I'm using, and boom, he gobbles, cuts me off. Put that call down, get your gun up on your knee, and get ready, okay? When a gobbler cuts you off, trust me, more times than not, he is afoot. And here's another thing I tell you as a hunter. Another way a lot of turkey hunts get lost is because hunters grossly underestimate how quickly a gobbler can get to their lap. Again, your cuts fly down. You'll hear in the morning when they're coming down. Starts out. And then typically, a lot of times right during that, you'll hear gobbles. That's just a hen heading down to the ground. She's letting not only the gobbler know, but everybody know that she's on the ground. I don't get too much into these in the seminars, but your mouth call. Now, I will tell you, I would encourage all turkey hunters to practice with a mouth call. And the reason why I ask you to do that is because this call is going to allow you to be hands-free when you need to be hands-free and focusing solely on waiting for the bird, looking for the bird. Little subtle sounds like that. My mouth's dry, so excuse me for that. But with a mouth call, you can keep your sounds, your vocalization going. And again, you're focusing on the bird. So it gives you an opportunity. Put your calls down. Again, one of the worst things you can do is, you got a bird coming to you, and it's very difficult sometimes to judge the distance of the bird. As the season grows on and the foliage gets onto the trees, it can tend to knock the sound down. And even though you may think the bird's further away, he's actually closer. And you got to remember, birds can see you a lot further than you think they can. And, when you're sitting there and you're reaching for a call, that can blow your hunt. So you use those other calls, such as your slate call or your box call or your push pin call, or it's called little trough call. There's other calls you can use, but if you're able to begin to use a mouth call with enough proficiency, you don't have to be great at it. I take a lot of birds with a mouth call because I put one in and I use it and I chew on it until lunchtime and spit it out and go get another one the next day. But that's just my little thing. And I would tell you that the thing about calling turkeys is the more calls you're able to run, the more turkey sounds, such as, your simple yelps, clucks, pucks, purrs. There's a handful of calls you can emulate those sounds with. You'll decide which one you prefer to use. I encourage everybody to try to learn all those sounds on all those different calls, because sometimes this call may only get the bird's attention, but not get him to move, where this call, if you put that one down and pick this one up and do exactly the same things, that might be the one that gets the bird to move. So, don't be afraid to, in your little arsenal of calls, to try different calls. I do it all the time. There's times when I'm working a difficult bird, one that I, feel is, is pretty smart or he's wily. And in the end, whether I get that bird or I don't get that bird, when I'm done, I've got a mess laying in front of me. I've got all kinds of stuff laid out because I just kept switching up. As you get down the line, you can do, and this is, for hunters that want to begin to, do other things. But a lot of times I have my mouth call, my pot call. All I'm doing, I'm emulating the sound of a couple of birds just jawing at each other, and that sometimes is enough to get that gobbler to say, I got to get over there and see what's going on. So again, all kinds of things to think about. And a lot of your turkey hunts, you'll have plenty of time to do that. You think about, you get in the woods at 5 o'clock in the morning and you're out there maybe till noon, and you got 7 hours to practice and try different things. And I also would tell you too, with those calls, baked into your calling again is a whole nother level of strategy. What I tell hunters is, and I do this a lot, if you've got a bird that's hung up, you've been going back and forth with them with a call or two, and he's gobbling to you, and he's not moving, and it's 10:30 in the morning, and you think he should because you don't think he's with the hens. One of the things that can really work for you, there's two things that can work for you. One is getting closer to him without busting him. Now, the reason why I do that is, and when I tell you about moving, I encourage movement when you, the hunter, feel it's necessary to do it. Why? Because the hen is supposed to go to the gobbler. So in the world of turkey hunting, if you're stuck in one spot and you've been calling too long, that gobbler has you pinpointed. You should understand that a gobbler that's 200 yards away from you, if he moves on you and he gets into your, call it your bedroom, and for whatever reason he gets on top of you and you weren't ready to shoot, he's going to know exactly where you are. You almost every time a gobbler will show up, he will look exactly at where you're at. He knows where you are the minute he hears you. He's a master of his environment.
I think that's another good thing to maybe expand on a little bit more. We think about, the different landscapes, especially across New Jersey. It's quite the mosaic of, you can be hunting at 50 feet above sea level, or you could be, up in the, mountains of North Jersey. Could you maybe talk a little bit about maybe utilizing or preferences for call types in different landscapes, or environmental conditions? For example, I think back to, one of the things a lot of people like to do on windy days is using that box call because it'll really carry. If you could maybe talk a little bit about any of that.
Sure. It's a good point. I would tell you, so let's talk about windy days. Or let's talk about what I call about prospecting. I call it prospecting. That's when, things didn't go so right for you early in the morning. It's midday. You haven't gotten a bird to gobble. You're working your way up until noon, or it might be D week and you're hunting all day. You may be in an area where you've got, hills, or you might be in the mountains. You've got hollers to consider. Hollers are big drop, valleys that are tucked in between your hills or your mountains. You need a call that's going to reach out and get a bird's attention. One of the things you're trying to do with a bird is get him to shock gobble. And so at least if he's, standing off and he's a couple hundred yards away, and, what I'll do a lot of times, and the best call to use for that is a box call. There's also, by the way, is a long box. It's a little bit longer box than a short box. I don't have one in front of me, but basically they both do the same thing. But what I'll do with that call is I'll just literally hold it up and I'll hit that call hard like that, because that will get into that bird's ears, and a lot of times that'll be just enough to get him to gobble. With that, once I have a location on him, then I can move in that direction as quickly as possible, get much closer proximity, and that's when I'll switch to, when I get settled, some of the more subtle calls where I don't have to overpower him, but I can potentially finish him either with a pot call or a mouth call or some other type of call. Windy days are a challenge because wildlife doesn't like the wind to begin with. So you've got to get in a situation where you can put yourself in the best position you can when you make calls, like I did with that box call, that you can potentially hear that bird when he does gobble. I will tell you though, and remember also, conversely, if you're hunting open areas, if you're in flat agriculture areas, remember your calls are going to go a lot further. And so that's where, you want to err a little more on the subtle side so that you don't blow that turkey out of the property. You can get away with calling aggressively, but I always tell new turkey hunters, start off easy on the birds and work your way up to that. Don't go in there blasting away. And again, the biggest mistake a lot of turkey hunters make is that they love to hear the birds gobble back to them. And just because he's gobbling back to you doesn't mean that you're going to get that bird. So it's finding the right tempo, the right cadence, and the right level of tone to potentially make him feel comfortable enough that he'll come to you, or maybe get the hens to come to you, which in some cases is going to drag the gobbler and tow along with them. The other thing I tell you too is when we talked about setups, most people want to hear birds gobble. They want to hear birds gobble when they strike them 100, 200 yards away, and they want to hear them gobble all the way into the gun. I would tell you that a lot of your birds today are going to come in quiet, and you've got to be cognizant of that as a turkey hunter. So that's where it requires you to be particularly sensitive to being stealthy. A lot of gobblers today, and there's a couple of reasons why gobblers do this. One, all wildlife evolves. I think you can't really pick a species out that over the years haven't modified their actions due to predation or pressure. Turkeys are no different. They're learning. I don't have to gobble as much, but I can still get the job done. So when you don't hear a bird gobble, or maybe you strike him, you may do like I did earlier with the box call. You might hit him, he gobbles, and then you get no more gobbles out. I still tell you to get in proximity to where you think you want to set yourself up, get settled, give that bird time. I always tell people, let a turkey be a turkey, which when I say that, I mean is give him time to do what he was going to do the way he wants to do it. It's not always going to be like television where they come running in on video. Remember, sometimes these folks go through hours and hours of cutting and splicing to get the perfect video that makes it look like that they've got the magic sauce and they hit the bird and then he comes. Sometimes they do that. I get, every year I'll get a TV hunter too, the type where the bird just does everything you want him to do. But more times than not, that bird's going to come in on you quiet. And so you've got in your mind, you've got to give yourself kind of your own little time clock. How long is too long to sit? I can't really give you that. There's no perfect science for that. You got to develop a feeling for that. And there are sounds you can listen for. I would encourage you to go to YouTube and listen to a bird spit and drum. It wouldn't be appropriate really for me to try to emulate it for you. But I could give you a sense of it, but I tell you, go to YouTube. It took me years to be able to hear a bird spit and drum. And that's basically sounds that a gobbler's making with his diaphragm and his wings to when he's strutting and he's trying to get that hen to close the distance, that last, call it 30, 40, 50 yards. What I would tell you is once you learn to recognize the sounds of spitting and drumming, if you hear it and you don't see a turkey, you just need to know that turkey is probably already within shot range. There's just some kind of foliage or cover blocking him. So you better stay quiet, you better stay still, and you better stay ready. Again, so many turkey hunters, I can't emphasize this enough, lose their hunts because literally at the close to the moment of truth, they move, they stand up, they do something to really give the turkey a chance to see you and literally head off and just leave the area.
Those are all some great points, Lou. So what I want to do, since you're bringing up, this idea of these birds getting, within earshot or in gun range, not even being able to, I guess, see them that they're there yet. I want to back up real quick to the idea of where this is, a good situation or scenario where the diaphragm call comes into play because again, your hands free, you have the gun up and ready to go. I would say personally, diaphragm calls are probably one of the more intimidating ones to learn. What exactly, if you could try to explain, are you doing to make that sound? Like, how do you have that call oriented in your mouth?
So I'm putting it top of my tongue, pressing it up against the roof of my mouth. Sometimes they're not always a perfect fit for the hunter right out of the gate. You may do a little trimming or such. I've watched hunters when they first try to run them, they gag on them. But most folks can put them in. And really what I try to get the caller to do in the beginning is get it positioned and blow air across it from your diaphragm. You're bringing that air up. All I'm doing is pushing air across that call. That's just to get you acclimated to the airflow. That's before you try to make any turkey sounds. Almost like a chuck, 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 chuck. And all I'm doing is blowing that air across the top of that call. Once you begin to be able to make sounds with the mouth call, then you can start to kind of, practice on the different sounds. Finishing a bird with a mouth call is, once you learn how to use a mouth call, it's really gonna kind of seal the deal for you as a caller. Because when you're sitting on the ground, whether you're in a chair or you're backed up against a tree with your vest, and you get to a point where that bird is coming or you think he's coming, even if he's not vocal, you absolutely have a point there where you no longer can reach for a call. You just, unless you know where he is, you probably don't want to do that. So having that mouth call, a lot of those little purrs I'm doing, that's sometimes the only thing I'll do when a bird is in proximity to me. And sometimes I'll hear a bird spitting and drumming. And I might hear him doing that and I've had this happen to me countless times. It'll go on for 20 minutes. And I know he's there. I can't see him. And then every 5 minutes, 3, 4, 5 minutes or so, I hit him with a couple purrs. He's not going to gobble. He's already decided, I'm not gobbling. I'm going to stand here and strut, and I'm going to wait for that hen to walk into view. But eventually, the old curiosity killed the turkey, right? Is that he makes the mistake of either sticking his neck up too far or moving past the trees behind or whatever it is he's doing, that because you're sitting at alert, because you're able to do that with that mouth call, you get a chance to see that bird. And again, as I spoke earlier, a lot of times in your hunts, and I tell you again this one, reason to practice being stealthy. Stealthy, what I mean is being able to sit still. Your gun on your knee, very quiet and still. A lot of times, unfortunately, the first birds that come to you or to your setup are either going to be a hen sometimes or jakes. Jakes will lead the pack. They'll come running in because that's what they do, and they'll get up literally within feet of you, and you got to sit still and you've got to play that out and be at your best behavior in order for you to give that gobbler chance to bring up the rear and come right on in so that you can potentially get that shot and take that bird. Again, you can get away with a little bit in turkey hunting, but you'll learn that as you turkey hunt. You know, there's a right time when to move, when not to move your gun. You know, I tell folks, you know, when you've got a gun on your knee and that bird's looking down the end of that barrel, if you just so effortlessly just make your subtle moves, things you want to look for is you got a gobbler that comes in, let's say he gets in on you 25 yards and he's strutting around in front of you. I always tell folks, if you can get him out of strut and let him expose his whole neck to you, that's going to be your best shot. That's the one you want, right? It gives you a great target and it gives you a chance for a good ethical kill. That's where sometimes a mouth call, just by hitting a couple simple, you know, like that, he'll stick his head up and gobble. When he does that, pow, then you can hit him. But when he's tucked in strut, he's all tucked in like that. Remember, you know, he's got all that chest feathers sticking up. And boy, the last thing you want to do is shoot a turkey in the body, because you might knock him down, but more times than not, he's going to get up and run away from you. And it's a terrible feeling. It's, you know, I would hope that no one ever has to deal with that. And it's just not a good feeling. So give him a chance to do what he needs to do. Here's what I tell hunters. Once you call that bird into your bed, you know, call that your kill zone, if you will. You've patterned your gun at 25 yards. You feel good out to 40 yards, you know, whatever your safe zone is. Once he gets into that, what you call I call in my mind a kill zone. Let him perform a little bit. Don't rush your shot. Don't bang your gun up and, you know, so many things. And I know it's tough because, look, turkeys can, you know, they can get the heart a pounding. You know, give him a chance to give you the perfect profile. If he's at your decoys, you know, so many guys have blown holes in their decoys because they got nervous and shot the decoys instead of the turkey. The time's to move. If he's in strut, right? As soon as he turns around, he puts his fan to you, reposition. Now, remember, you can do that if he's by himself. If there's a hen standing there looking at you, don't do that. But a lot of times a gobbler will come in by himself. You don't like the angle. Let him swirl around. He's in strut. As soon as he turns his tail to you, reposition. Now when he comes back out, then you might want to hit him with that mouth call, get him to stick that neck up, pow. I know it might sound like a lot to process, but these are the things that make the complete turkey hunt. Those kinds of things. I think you'll be grateful after the hunt that you did it, because it's like a fish story, right? The last thing you want to do is like reel the fish in like 5 yards and he flops in the boat. You want to tell the story, right? You want to have something to the memory, to covet the memory. So I say all that is part of the hunt, and that's how you learn to mix your calls up. You learn through that what you can get away with a turkey, what you can't get away with a turkey. This is a time when I tell everybody, today's technology, my goodness, we've marketed. It started with the long beards. You could shoot them out to 60, 70 yards. And We've got the great chokes today and the great shotguns, and we've got TSS. I hunt with a 20 gauge with TSS 7.5s. I absolutely love the shell shot. And I am not an advocate to shoot at turkeys far away, but I do like a quick, clean, ethical kill. So what I tell folks is don't waste a great turkey hunt firing at a bird at 60 yards away, when if you just would have exhibited a little patience, infused a little more skill or trial and error, you'd be surprised you can get him to close that extra 20, 30 yards for you and really have a good ethical shot and finish with an amazing hunt. So there are the things I tell hunters to think about before they say, well, my gun's good out to 60 yards, because then, that's great. And there's a whole lot of, but to me, you're missing the essence of what the complete hunt is all about.
We went through kind of, preseason, how you're kind of, strapping on your boots in the morning, getting ready for the hunt, kind of giving everybody a little bit of taste of some different calls that you ran and some different, scenarios that they may come across. The one thing I kind of want to end on, though, is so we kind of got all the way from A to B. Now we're going to kind of end with C. Let's say, as we're wrapping this up, somebody's had a successful hunt out there. They've shot their first turkey. Do you have any sort of advice to offer as far as handling that bird? Because obviously, when people are successful, we want them to enjoy the bird as much as the bird as possible. So I think that'd be a nice way to kind of end this off, is some advice as far as what people can do to ultimately enjoy that bird.
I do. So let's assume that the hunter has had a successful hunt, and it's 11 o'clock, 12 o'clock, and your hunt's done, and you're finding your way out of the woods, and now you've got a bird you took, it's a beautiful animal, and the next step is you want to enjoy it in a couple of ways. So here's a couple of things I tell you to think about. Depending on the proximity to where you live, where you're hunting, is going to play a part in how you handle the bird. The daily temperatures are going to play a part. If it happens to be on the cooler side of the day, you get away with a little more and letting the bird go until you get it home to dress it. If it's a particularly warm day, especially late in the season, we get some days where by midday it's pushing upside of 80, and you decide that you're going to make a stop or two before you get home. I would tell you at that point, you probably want to make sure you take the insides out of that bird before you take him home. I wouldn't leave him encapsulated with his entrails in him. Now, what I will do many days is I will put a bag of ice in a cooler, because I'm famous for, in the event I get a bird or I'm with somebody that gets a bird, I like to go have breakfast, and that's part of the celebration of a wonderful hunt. So I'll put that bird in a cooler with some ice, and that's just enough to keep him cooled down. The most important thing with wild game, no matter what animal you're harvesting, is to keep the animal cool until you field dress it or get it scun out or plucked out or whatever it is you decide to do. So again, you want to get that bird, when you get him home, now you can make the decision as to what you want to do with him. Personally, I use the whole bird. I don't just breast the bird out. I take off his thighs and his legs. I love to cook those in a pressure cooker. Honestly, pressure cookered thighs and legs comes out like pulled pork. You put a little bit of barbecue sauce in it, and my goodness, you've got a heck of a meal on your hands there. Your breast meat, there's a host of ways and things you can do with that. I also have a butcher. I have a butcher who many times I'll take the turkey to the butcher. He makes me breakfast sausages. He makes me thin cutlets. He makes me meatballs. I do a lot of things, vacuum packed with my turkey meat. Another thing that I tell you to consider is, in the event when you go hunting that day, you've made a decision that in the event you get a bird that you deem respectable enough to go to the taxidermist, there's some things I tell you to think about before you go. I always keep a paper towel in my satchel bag, and the reason I do that is because as soon as I carry those simple wipes, for that and for other reasons. And I carry the paper towel in the event that I get a bird that somebody wants to mount, or in the past when I wanted to mount them. The first thing you want to do is you just break off some pieces of that paper towel, put it in that turkey's mouth. The worst thing for a taxidermist is when there's too much blood on the feathers. So a couple of things to think about. When you shoot a bird, birds tend to like to flop around and do a lot of things. Try to minimize that as much as you can. I will caution you, though, this is where safety comes in again. Very important. And I didn't hearken on so much of this back during the shooting, but I will emphasize, obviously, at all times when you're hunting, keep your safety practices first and foremost, knowing what your target is and beyond. So that just speaks for itself. After you've put your gun away, ensured it's unloaded, you go get this bird. He's flopping around. Don't underestimate the damage those spurs can do to you. I've seen folks errantly reach down to grab a bird by his legs and get opened up pretty significantly by a spur. So again, be careful. Those spurs are like little daggers, and they will mess you up pretty good. So I like to go get the bird, and I like to just immobilize him as much as I can until he, expires, and as little flopping as possible, because that's as little feather loss as possible. Again, when you're thinking about mounting a bird. Now, in the event he strews feathers all over the place, I always carry a little bag, a little sandwich bag with me. I pick up many of those feathers as I can. I put them in the bag. I zip it up. When the bird goes to the taxidermist, I bring them the bird. I've cleaned them up the best I can, and I bring them that bag with the feathers. Because again, the taxidermist, they'll know what to do with them. So these are things that, again, pre-planning a cooler with some ice in it. Again, I could walk you through how to clean it, but go on YouTube for you hunters. Go on YouTube, look at field dressing a turkey. There's some great videos out there. You can visualize, you can look at the visual video of it. It'll give you a sense of what to do with the bird. If any of y'all have cleaned pheasants or quail or anything else, it's a bigger version of that. And really, it's your choice as to what you do with the cuts of meat, how you want to package them and prepare them. But the most important thing is to cool that animal down and make sure that you get it put away properly before you pull it back out at a later date to enjoy it. So hopefully those tips will help you. I know they've helped me over the years, and I continue to practice them. I try to take a few hunters out every year, and even if they don't ask me ahead of time, I carry those things with me in the event that when the hunt's over, they go, "Oh, gee, this is a beautiful bird. I'd really love to get this my first turkey. I want to get him mounted." We're prepared to go ahead and do that for them. And if you get the bird, by the way, if you get the bird to attack a local taxidermist soon enough, that local taxidermist many times will skin that bird out for you on location, and you can get the best of both situations, which is they get your cape and you get your turkey meat. So don't count that out. I personally, I think the greatest gift of a turkey hunt, aside from the memory, is the fact that you get to enjoy some of the most delicious meat on the planet afterwards.
Yeah, I would definitely agree with that. They're definitely some of the more tasty critters out there for sure. One thing I just want to, replicate with our conversation that we've been having is, there's a lot of good, tips and items I think that a lot of people tend to overlook, especially, as new hunters or frequent turkey hunters. So I think you hit a lot of good points as far as things to kind of keep in mind, just to be as proactive as possible out there when you're in the turkey woods. So what we're going to do now that we have about 15 minutes, we're going to jump into some questions, hopefully that our audience will want to have answered, and then we'll have this thing wrapped up.
Excellent.
We do have a couple of questions that did come in that we'd like to hopefully have answered now that we have about 15 minutes. The first one that comes in, back about halfway through this, we may have had a little bit of an audio issue, and I guess it seems like maybe I did kind of towards the beginning of this as well, so I apologize about that. When you were doing that cackling fly down call, would you be able to try and replicate that again on that box call? And again, maybe kind of elaborate a little bit on what that is indicative of?
I sure can. I'll give it a run for you. And you know, what you're going to hear really is right at the point when, and most times it's not, you'll hear a hen or even a gobbler. They'll pick their cadence of calling up as they get rammy on the limb. And so right when she comes, a lot of times she'll go from her yelping to she'll really cut hard as she's coming down. So it's kind of a, and then you might hear that gobble as soon as she hits the ground. So that's something you can emulate. I'll do that sometimes just to give that gobbler, if I've got his attention, I'll go ahead and do that because I want to be first in line. And there's things you can do with your hat, you can take your hat and hit it on the ground next to you, just to, as their wings, as they hit their wings, and they make all those kinds of sounds. And that sometimes will really help make a gobbler's mind up as which direction he wants to pitch down.
Great, thank you. The next one that we have, and this was a couple of different calls, one of which, I think we associate more to the fall season as opposed to the spring season. If you could talk a little bit about that key run call, but then also one of the other questions that came up, so I guess it's kind of a two-part question, is a putt, which, we more so associate to like an alarm call. So it's not really something we want to be replicating out in the field, right?
Now, the key run call in the fall is really when the younger birds are communicating with the older birds, and it's also a call the hens will use to call themselves back together. So if you follow the traditional way of busting a flock, when the hens get broke up, or even the gobblers, you give them a little time, and then you'll hear that. And that's just, you can emulate that, and you can put yourself in the calling sequence with the rest of those birds. Now, in addition to that, what was that other question? You had two things.
As far as like,
putting. I'm sorry, putting.
Yep.
So putting is an alert call, and obviously, as turkey hunters, we don't want to hear putting. That. If he or she starts doing that to you, look, a couple things. One, if you're not in a situation where you're ready to take a shot, then you're just going to have to sit still and let it unfold. You can try to calm them down with some subtle calls, but sometimes with turkeys, when they get to that part of their behavior, it's game over. And putting really, they're alerting themselves and any other birds in proximity to get out of the area. And I will tell you, you'll know it when you hear it, because you won't want to hear it in the future.
That's right. Next question that we have that we didn't really touch on, but I think it's going to be a good conversation piece for this question and answer part of this. We didn't really touch on locator calls. I know a lot of people, myself, for example, some of the areas that I hunt, particularly when I know birds either associate to water, whether it's creeks or some bottomlands where geese are nesting, I may carry a goose call on me. Other people may use crow calls or owl calls. Do you want to offer up any insight as far as locator calls and how they may benefit new turkey hunters?
Sure. I do carry a crow call, and I carry an owl hooter with me. I use the owl hooter more than I do the crow call. The owl hooter, generally, if I get into a situation where I expect that, given what I know is usually gobble time, and I don't hear any gobbles, I'll try to incite one with an owl hooter. So it can be an effective call to carry with you. Now, the crow call, more later in the morning or midday, gobblers don't like crows. Crows devil the dickens out of gobblers. So when you get to hitting them hard with a crow call, sometimes you can get a shock gobble. A lot of times I'll take a paddle call or a box call and hit them hard with that and get the same results. But this is, locator calls are just, look, if you've got room in your bag, bring them with you. I mean, because look, let's face it, as long as what I always say to everybody, as long as you're out there in the woods, you're still in the hunt, you might as well have all the tools of the trade with you.
Yeah, it's a great piece of advice. So to transition this a little bit, now that we're going to kind of deviate a little bit away from calls, we had a question come in relating to decoys, which, we didn't really cover since this is more of a calling seminar. But, I think there is still merit to talking about decoys since we have some time. So what types of decoys, or how do you, position decoys, or what decoys do you, maybe use? And it's kind of a two-part question, because they were also asking maybe what you use early season versus late season.
So early season, and let me preface by telling you that if your decision is to use decoys, remember, once you put them out, you live and die with them. Your hunt, it's either it's going to work or it's not going to work. And they can help you, and they can also bring a quick end to your hunt. So with that said, early in the season, I like to take a Jake and I like to take a submissive hen, because gobblers don't like Jakes trying to breed hens early in the season. Now, one thing you may run into, if you're hunting a piece of ground where you think, or you've got good intelligence that there are a bunch of Jakes deviling your gobbler and running him around and beating him up in the early season, you might want to not use that Jake, because at that time, then the gobbler, and I won't get into long-winded, but I just had a recent situation in North Carolina that taught me an old lesson. And again, it's you're successful with them or without them. Late in the season, there's two things I'll do. If I think I'm hunting a mature bird that's been a tough guy, I'm not beyond putting out a full gobbler. I've seen some amazing hunts unfold with mature birds coming in to fight a mature gobbler decoy. Realism in that case is going to help you immensely in terms of your decoy. I would tell you, if you're going to get decoys, invest a little money and get a better decoy. Some would argue that there's no difference in decoys to turkeys. I would argue that vehemently with folks, that the more realistic they are, the better. So a single hen, a couple hens, a lot of times in the late season is just enough to put a gobbler at ease and get him to walk in. And so early season, I do use a Jake. I'll use a Jake, a submissive hen, and maybe sometimes even a feeding hen. And late in the season, I'll go with either a single or a double hen, or if I want to get, creative, I'll put a mature gobbler out, and have had success with that. But with that said, remember, they can help you or they can ruin your hunt, and you got to make that decision ahead of time.
That's one of the great things,
Brian, also, I should add to that, position decoys is important. Obviously, if you're bow hunting turkeys, you want to have those decoys placed what you feel is that's your limit for a comfortable shot, because your plan is they're going to come into the decoys where you're going to take your shot. With your gun, you've got a little more room to play. I usually don't put them right out in front of me. Turkeys like to come in and head on into decoys. I like to have them to the left of me or to the right of me, because when those birds come in, if I'm using decoys, I want them to focus on the decoy and not be looking dead on at me while they're looking at the decoys. So there's some things, again, to think about. Positioning can absolutely make a difference with decoy setup.
Those are all great points. Again, I think, just having this back and forth, what it's going to reinforce is, as somebody is out there gaining that experience, with that experience is going to come some failures. And along the way, things are eventually going to click that, may seem minuscule in the moment, but looking forward as somebody, progresses along as a turkey hunter, they're going to be the difference between success and failure.
The one last question that we do have before we wrap up, if you have any insight about, one of the last questions that came in was why we tend to see more turkeys out in open fields when it rains, and what that kind of has as far as, insight for planning a turkey hunt.
That's a good question. And obviously a lot of folks see that. And the reason is that turkeys, they need to hear and see as much as they can. They really rely on. I mean, Ben Franklin said years ago, if turkeys could smell, you'd never kill them. And I really believe that. But when a turkey's in the woods and it's raining, it takes away a lot of his ability to hear anything. So they tend to move out into the fields far enough where they got plenty of room around them, and so they're not as susceptible to predators. So coyotes and other things that might take them down can't make easy prey out of them. So usually that's why they'll congregate out in the open on a rainy day.
Perfect. Thank you for that. So with that being said, we don't have any more questions. Again, I just want to thank everybody. I want to thank Lou for taking some time out of his busy schedule to be able to sit down and talk with us. I want to thank Joe again for supplementing some of this talk that we've done tonight, some of the presentation format of it. Karen Byrne behind the scenes for our webinar. When we do these types of things for our R3 program, it's definitely a group effort. So I want to thank them, make sure that's well known, and best of luck for everybody, whether it's Youth Day on Saturday or, come early Monday morning and beyond. Thank you all and have a good night.
Thank you, Ryan.
Appreciate your time.